Okay, we are told.
Murder, suicide.
Would everyone please remain on mute? And welcome, Dave.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Sounds good.
Okay, everybody's giving, a lot of people are giving thumbs up. Thank you. So I'd first like to thank Mike and, of course, the Association for Wolf Lake Initiative for inviting me to speak again. I've spoken here a couple times on things. I was a member of the board for a couple years. It's a great organization. I've told Mike that he's one of these people who should win the MacArthur Award for what he's done on a whole new thing, and we just get overlooked. Help with saving Wolf Lake. So anyway, thank you, and hopefully you'll enjoy the presentation. Mike's going to have to turn over to me, and then I'll get my PowerPoint up. I'll talk over it, and hopefully you'll enjoy the discussion of the talk, the images, and at the end there is a song that will summarize, a live song that will summarize everything we've covered. So if you miss it first, you catch it. Hopefully you'll catch it afterwards. Okay, since I'll probably be covered up, so I will be singing live, okay, from my home. All right, so Mike, I think you have to turn it over to me, I believe, so you can see my screen.
You should be able to get it, Dave.
Well, okay, I mean, I am up. Let me know if people can see fully. I should have a full screen. Can that be seen fully?
No.
I think you have to turn over a host to me.
Yeah, it should. It's usually always on that. I don't
see that I've been asked to be co-host.
Okay.
That's what I'm used to on Zoom, at least.
Okay. Does that help?
Share. Is that share? Share screen. Let me see. Share desktop. Okay.
United States.
Okay, let me see here. Yes. Okay. That should work. Let me see.
More notes. We'll rain down the United States.
I can hit share all, but
can you see my thing now?
Running nuclear fire. We'll be threatening nuclear fire. They know how weak.
Can people see my thing, Geology as Destiny?
There we go. I think.
Is it visible now as a full screen?
It's not quite green.
I cannot see it.
I can't see it.
Share entire screen.
I hit share.
Okay, let me try this. All right, let me try this here. Does it look like you have my desktop now?
No.
I have put, I'm sure, it says.
With life in danger. You could lose your life, suicide.
See, I'm seeing, excuse me, I'm seeing my
blameless. Do it for him. Do it. There's no time. There's no time.
Your screen sharing, it shows me.
No way.
We can see your desktop now.
You can?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, so now if you see this fully, so is that now the full thing? Can you see like
you're still not coming through as loud as others.
Well, I think my microphone is as loud as it can be.
Change our view?
I can hear you fine, but all I see is your desktop, Dave.
But you do not see the program?
No.
Your screen sharing is paused. Let's see, maybe this, how do I unpause it?
Oh,
No, there's his desktop.
This is ridiculous.
No, I've never, yeah, I mean,
You think that person meant to be
share
audible to
sound,
everyone?
share sound, let's see, optimize for video sharing.
I said, the person who said this is ridiculous. Do you think that was somebody that didn't mean to be heard?
No. Remote control, more share. I mean,
I can see you now and this screen.
So and can everyone see the screen pretty well? I mean, my presentation, I have my slides up now.
I,
Just see the desktop is all.
You just see a desktop, you do not see the PowerPoint.
That's correct.
Boy, I don't understand. Speaker. How about this? Can you see that?
No,
no,
I don't know, Mike. I've never had, I mean, I do Zoom a lot.
yeah, I know. And I've never had this problem either, but when
See, I'm getting other people sharing, like this looked like John's. You have to give me, Mike, as far as I remember how it works. You have to pick me to share. As you host the meeting.
okay,
That's how I believe it works.
okay,
Dave, go to your desktop. Once you're on your desktop, click on the folder that's your program, and it will pop up.
Well, this is my slide presentation here. I have it fully on my screen. Are people not seeing that? It says outline right now.
No,
oh,
I think Mike has to I've never seen him give me my screen over. That's what I saw other people's screens.
I think the word is co-host.
Yes.
You know, you go to click the down arrow and look for make co-host. You know, click the down arrow on Dave's name,
yeah.
under Dave's name.
okay,
It'll say make co-host is as far as I remember.
Professor who's been doing this a lot for at least 4 years now.
Oh.
We're trying to tell them.
You have started screen sharing. Double click to enter full screen mode.
Host, and Mike can't figure it out.
so I have to,
There's a desktop with mountains in the background.
But that is not my desktop.
Is that yours, Michael?
yeah, says share, can't, I can't,
One option I've used in this situation is, can you share your program,
It
Dave?
looks like
And
it looks like I could share. There's shares in green with an up arrow.
Yes, she's given it to somebody named John. Perhaps, but it's not me.
I'm, I don't know. How do I get the arrow to you, Dave?
I think if you hit the 3 red little buttons on the right for you, it's going to offer you some menu items and then to share, and then you be able to pick the person who you want to share. That's what it should be. Because I'm seeing it's Michael, it's your screen.
Yeah.
I add something. It looks like everybody has the ability to share. And so if you have your PowerPoint open already, if you click on share and go to your PowerPoint, it should be able to present what you're trying to show. Which may be why it's only showing if you're clicking on your desktop and it's not necessarily opening the PowerPoint at the same time.
No, I think he's not giving it to me, is what I think.
Okay, but if you're able to share your screen, then you do have permission to do the share abilities because I can also see the share options.
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen, but nobody seems to see this fully. So here is my.
Okay,
There it
we
is.
can see it now.
And can you,
Outline.
Yes, we do. We see it now.
is a full screen something to see?
Yes,
Yes.
it
Yeah,
is.
it's coming through now.
Okay, okay.
Glossary.
Okay, okay. Well then, thank you. All right. So let me start the title here. Okay. Glaciers, Voyageurs, and Carp. Here we go. So, I don't think I need to give all the background, but if something, and then glossary. All right, so the whole thesis of my talk, and I've been doing this for several years, and I developed a class at Columbia College actually also on this, is, why is Chicago the dominant metropolis in the middle part of North America? It's not the oldest. Places like St. Louis and Memphis are older. It's not exactly the center. Something like where the Ohio River joined the Mississippi would be the center. So why is it Chicago? Well, there's reasons. There's reasons cities get located where they do at the time that they're founded, et cetera. And that's what I'd like to step through from my work and et cetera. So,
Dave, I hate to interrupt you, but all I'm seeing is Michael's screen with the mountains in the background. Okay, continue.
That's the same for
I'll
me.
listen.
I'll just listen too.
well, but you're missing the.
There's two, Zoom has come out with two like tabs. If you look at the top of your screen of your own computer, you can see it says Michael's stream and then Dave, Dolak at CalumetRevisited010725 screen. So there's two tabs. If you're in one tab, try the other tab.
It's in view options on my screen at the top of the screen. I mean, it's the green thing.
Thank you for the view options. I scrolled down and found Dave's email and clicked on that, and now I got it. So thank you for that advice. Perfect.
Thanks, Mark. I hear that. I hear your voice. Okay. Now can people see my full screen, sort of? There's 1800 Chicago River outlet.
It has disappeared.
It disappeared.
I got into it momentarily. Now I lost it again.
So that must be something I'm doing then. It says allow multiple presenters to share. And so I hit allow.
And it should designate a person to share. You can't usually have everyone share their screen. That's a mess.
It's the entire screen. And that's where I'm.
Bear with us.
Share at the bottom. Yeah.
So Dave, if you go back to share your screen how you had it before.
I'm trying something here. Let's see. I hit share. Let's see here. No, that's from my sharing at Columbia College. It has nothing to do with this. You should be able to. Mike has to just designate my computer.
And I'm just so how I can do that. I don't.
How are we doing? As yeah, the main screen I still see is Mike's.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And under view options, there's no longer an option to choose you, Dave. There was momentarily, but that's gone now.
That should be just the person who's hosted the meeting.
So Zoom has an option that you can make somebody a co-host to share their screen, or you can just
Yeah,
change
that's what I am used to. That's that
Yes.
they're make
But-
co-host.
Yes, but you can also change it so that you can have multiple people share their screen without having the co-host ability. So if you go back to share where you were before and share your screen, you should be able to do that without him having to change the co-host abilities. So if Mike goes in, okay, we see it now. The PowerPoint is there. We just need it in full screen.
Okay, I'll try it again here. All right. Is that full screen?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
Is it for other people? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, good.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
I'll have to figure it out. Go ahead.
can most people see where I'm at? This is the United
By
States.
the location.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Okay. So Chicago's in the blue, doesn't exist yet. St. Louis, Kentucky, and Memphis do. About the earliest image we have of what is Chicago is a woodcut in the Historical Society. It's around 1800, and it's depicting here on the right the first non-native inhabitant of the city, John Baptiste du Sable, and there really weren't teepees here. But those of us who are from Chicago can recognize there's the North Branch, the South Branch, and the main branch, the Chicago River. We may find a little odd, it's turning south because most of us know, yes, it actually goes straight into the lake. Originally, it entered south about near Roosevelt Road. So this is about the earliest image of what the Chicago River emptying into the lake looked like. By 50 years later, the river has been straightened, and now we have a city of 40 or 50,000 people, and on its way to, of course, being the fastest growing city of all time. And I'm going to talk about the reasons why from a geographic and geologic perspective. And of course, there's today, we can't even see the river coming in, but we know it sneaks in here at the by Navy Pier and by the Chicago Lock. Maps are very important for geographers and geologists. So there's our normal road map of Chicago. This is a Landsat picture that sort of shows the green shows the vegetation, and then this physiographic map shows the elevation. Everybody thinks that Chicago is pretty flat, and the city it's pretty flat. But if you get out into the hinterlands, it's hilly. You know, it's not mountain, but it's hilly. And the main thing for this whole talk is I want to focus on this. Can everyone see this Y-shaped structure that's sort of facing to the east? Can everyone see that with my arrow?
Yes.
Okay, that's going to be the central thing of my entire talk. All right. So give a little history of the Chicago area in time. Basically the only rocks you could find here are bedrock, which was deposited 400 million years ago in a tropical ocean type environment, and then the surface deposits that were deposited 15,000 years ago when the last glaciers left this area. Everything else in between those two major time periods does not exist in our area any longer, probably because of the glaciers. Our bedrock can be seen in a few places in the area, most notably those of us who have been down in or crossed over the mighty Thornton Quarry on the south side, but there's a few places in the city where it's close enough to the surface. Oops, excuse me. Just interesting fun fact, that same bedrock is called the Niagaran Dolomite. It's the same rock as at Niagara Falls because that rock outcrop, as you can see, exposed on the west side of Lake Michigan, Door County, and also here at Niagara Falls. So that's the same bedrock. That's a picture when we turned off Niagara Falls in 1969 to clean it up from normal rock falling. It wasn't pollution, but sort of weird. All right. Next part of our story are glaciers. Glacier is basically just ice that moves. Once it's accumulated thick enough, it will move of its own accord, by its own weight, or it'll move downhill if it's coming from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. I took this picture years ago flying into Alaska. There's a beautiful picture of a number of glaciers coming off from ice fields up here. And just looking at that to me it shows something that's moving. You know, most geologic processes, except for a volcano or earthquake, happen pretty slowly. But you can see that looks like something moving, and glaciers can move many feet in a day. Glaciers are not just your ice cube in a refrigerator. They pick up rocks as they go because under the thick, heavy pressure of ice, it actually has a consistency of sort of silly putty. It will pick up rock, and then those rocks become very erosive. It'll grind the land. On the lower right is a picture of a glacier at the foot of Mount Rainier I camped at a number of years ago. And you can see it's filled with rocks and things that it's picked up on its journey along the way. So that's an important part of our story so glaciers move while they advance. And then when the climate changes or they reach a part they can no longer stay as ice, they melt. That's the retreat. They don't go back up the mountain, they just melt. Everything carried with the glacier, therefore, just drops where it's at. This is also an important part of our story. So if you can look at a glacier here, this is an advancing glacier. It also is pushing material in the front. It's filled with things. It's filled with rocks. It's picked up along the way. Those are commonly known as erratics because they've come from somewhere else. They weren't actually formed maybe where they're found. When the glacier leaves then, because it's finally melted, it may leave a pile of material. This is collectively known as a moraine. Okay, especially where the glacier stalled for a while, it piles up more of this material. It's known as an end moraine. And the composition of the glacier material is called till. It's just a mixed bag of everything from giant boulders, to cobbles, to sand, to silt, to clay. So a big part of our story is we've had several times in the last million or so years where the climate got cold enough that ice accumulated in the poles and then moved toward the center of the planet. And in the north here, we call the ice ages.
I don't care.
And the most recent one was reached its peak at 18,000 years ago.
Start doing your own.
We call it the Wisconsin stage. They wound up, of course, carving Great Lakes. Eventually, they melted back to Canada, and they're gone now, except for the Greenland ice sheet. But the important part of our story is the areas they dug out got filled the bodies of water we know as the Great Lakes. And immediately around Chicago, they deposited a large moraine known as the Valparaiso Moraine. So if you can look, here's sort of the extent of the ice at the maximum. This is the size of Antarctica, and there were two major accumulation zones, probably 15,000 feet of ice, similar to modern Antarctica. You can see it stretched down to the Ohio Valley. There was about 3,000 feet near us of ice. So that's taller than doubling the height of any of the buildings that we know in Chicago. Geologists have various ways of seeing what the land surface was like before the glaciers. What does that look like to anybody? Looks like an outline of the Great Lakes to me. Before the ice came, these were rivers. And they were low areas that had been there for thousands of years, probably from earlier glaciations. And the water was collecting and collectively moving out its way to the northeast, So these are already low areas. And then when the ice came in the final glacial advance, and then when they finally started to retreat after climate changing, you can see what happened. It dug out those low areas slightly deeper than they were. And of course, the melting ice has to go somewhere. It starts to fill them up. So by about 18,000 years ago is about the maximum extent of the ice. Other images will show it going to southern Indiana. I didn't want to show that far, but it does. I went to graduate school in Bloomington, and the glacier stopped just before Bloomington. So the ice is starting to melt back. By 10,000 years ago, it's gone from what we know as United States. It's still in Canada, but you can see what's emerging is the outline of the waters that we know as the Great Lakes. And by 8,000 years ago, it's got a pretty good idea, but they're not fully filled yet. Here's Lake Michigan, and Chicago would be here. We know that it wasn't filled yet because divers discovered a buried forest that we can date to 8,000 years ago, and it was about 40 miles offshore of the Indiana Dunes. I know some of those divers. So that's how we know about when the lakes finally filled up by about 4,000 years ago. And the important thing to recognize for those who know the Great Lakes is the natural flow of the water is, of course, from Lake Superior, which is the upper lake, that's from the French word, it's the upper, the top lake, flows through the St. Mary Channel into Lake Michigan Huron, which are the same, through Lake St. Clair, Detroit River, Lake Erie, over Niagara Falls, Lake Ontario, and out to the northeast via the St. Lawrence Seaway. Back at this point, you notice there was water was flowing this way for a while. That's another central part of our story. So let's continue. So remember what a glacier does. It's bringing material, it deposits it. When it leaves, it might deposit a larger mound of material depending on, where it stalled before it finally moved back. We know the glaciers are here also because we find large erratic rocks in the Chicago area. They're not native here. They're from northern Michigan or Canada. This is a monument to Marquette, who's part of our story a little later. And these rocks also have scratches in them. And the only thing in nature that does this to a rock is a glacier. So we have a lot of evidence sort of for this. I did a bicycle trip around Lake Superior about 12, 13 years ago, primarily to see where the native rocks, such as these granites and gneisses, actually come from that we find in our farmer field. Somebody has got their thing on. Everybody needs to their thing. So this is on my bike trip to northern Lake Superior in Canada. It was a 3-week trip. Took me 3 weeks to circle the lake, but this is glacier. This is granite. Somebody please turn their thing off.
Hey, Blake. Everybody. Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Okay. So when the glaciers then left, they left this material on top of the bedrock. So this huge gap in time, we call it an unconformity. So 400 million year old, relatively hard, or at least limestone dolomite rock, and then this just mixture of material on top, and there's sort of Lake Michigan. So let's go back to another sort of image of the lake. So the maximum extent of the glacier, this shows it a little better. Right south of Indianapolis is where the glacier stopped. And as it melted back, look what happens. The lakes are starting to fill up, but the water can't go the original way it was intending. And it's like your bathtub overflowed. The water found a path through that moraine and broke through. Oops, sorry. It broke through two places. There was the Kankakee Torrent, and more particularly for us, the Chicago Torrent. And so right at this point, here we go on the right, this is the situation. The ice is still here. The Valparaiso moraine is sort of your bathtub ring. And eventually the water found a low spot in here and it broke through in two places. You see that Y? Do you remember back from the original image that I had on the ground? Okay, so that flooded through there, all the way down to the bedrock. Probably for several hundred years, it would have been sort of the Mississippi River size flood. And eventually, as the ice finally melted away, the waters got to flip back to going into the lake where they originally should go. And then we had some waters about 10 miles from Chicago that will follow that old Y. And this is called the Chicago Outlet. So there's the picture then. Can you see how that Y was formed? It cut right through the Valparaiso moraine here about 150 feet all the way down to the bedrock. So that's when that flood, because the ice was blocking the filling up of Lake Michigan, that's where the water went. So of course, for a while it was going southwest and eventually joining the Mississippi River. This is a geologic map. It just shows it went all the way to the bedrock. That's our bedrock, the purple in this map, where this is the Valpo moraine, this green color. All right, so why is that important? I put everything in my context of being a cross-country bicycle rider. I put many things into it. So the end result is many of us have probably crossed the country overland, and we know of the continental divide, the separation of the waters from east going to the Mississippi, or the Atlantic, and west going to the Pacific. But there's actually several other major continental divides in North America. there's going to the Arctic Ocean. There's a peak in Glacier National Park where the water can go one of three ways: north, west, or south and east. Well, look at Chicago. Right next to us is another divide. This is the divide that separates the waters that go into the Great Lakes historically, and then out through the St. Lawrence to the North Atlantic, from everything that goes here into the Mississippi River and out through the Gulf of Mexico. So we have a continental divide here as well. It's not as mighty as the Rocky Mountain divide. Okay, that's me crossing the country on a bicycle at 10,000 feet at Milner Pass in Colorado. Has anybody ever been to the top of any major pass in the West? You always see a white line at the divide, and usually there's a stain from somebody pouring water over it. Or if you're a guy, well, never mind. Okay, you understand what I mean. The only place I could find a continental divide sign in my area is at Cedar Lake. And of course, there it is. 700 feet is not quite 10,700 feet. It is easier on a bicycle, I will attest. Okay, anyway, we continue. So for the water that cut through this moraine, and then finally when the ice moved, and all of this is happening with the continental crust moves a little bit, the water's wide. When the glaciers leave, you basically have this situation. You have the north and the south branch of the Chicago River going into Lake Michigan, into the Great Lakes, out through the St. Lawrence and the Calumet River. And then you have, through that old Y, you have the Des Plaines River going into what becomes the Illinois River to the Mississippi and the Gulf, with a little gap in between. This is our continental divide. Okay, it's again not 10,000 feet. It's about 20 feet. There it is. That's at North Avenue, just west of the city near Oak Park. Okay, but that's enough to send the waters one way or the other. And that's what nature left us. So that's really the whole central thing that I want to get to. So how did people exploit this? So early North America, look at this map from the early 1600s. We don't even have the Great Lakes listed here. Europeans hadn't found it yet. They have the west, it's like you can see Florida, you can see the East Coast, you can see the Hudson Bay, but the Great Lakes were not yet discovered. It looked like they knew there was a big river coming up from the south here, but not how far it went. Well, eventually, of course, the colonial European powers carve up North America. I mean, this is not a story about Native Americans. Obviously, they were not consulted in this. But eventually what happens is the French sort of get the blue area. The English have, of course, the coasts, and the Spanish have the south. Originally, they had some of this, and the French got it, and more history than we need. But so imagine you're a French trader, and you're trying to move from some of your outposts in Canada to New Orleans or other areas. You really can't go this way too easily because the British are not your friends. So the French explored the interior. Plus, they traded with the Native Americans. They intermarried, and they were the ones really exploring the interior. And what was the technology of exploring the interior? Canoes. They had adopted the Native American technology of canoes. Made them pretty big, but these were big enough that you could carry materials in them. And collectively, the people who piloted the canoes were the voyageurs. The first Europeans given credit to come through our area were, as part of a Voyager trip led by Native Americans, were Father Jacques Marquette. Of course, those of us in Chicago know there's a lot of things named Marquette University in Wisconsin, and Marquette Road, many things. And Louis Joliet, he was the leader of the Voyageur team. So Marquette was there, of course, to save souls as a priest. So their voyage was in 1673. They took off from the existing fort at the head of Lake Michigan, in St. Ignace, and their goal was actually to go to the Orient. They thought they were going to continue with Columbus's idea that, if you go far enough west, you get to China. Of course, Columbus ran into Hispaniola. But so they start going west through an existing portage. And then they realize they're in a big river that goes south, not west. And they had some Native American guides. So they got to about northern Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and they were told to turn around because at that time, actually, the French and the Spanish were still contesting over New Orleans. So they knew they couldn't, they realized this was going to go to New Orleans from earlier maps. So they had to turn around. But instead of going their original way down the Wisconsin River to the Illinois River, Mississippi, the natives showed them a shortcut. So it said if you cut up through this, which we know is the Illinois River, you could get to the big water in a shorter way. So they're given credit as the first Europeans to come through this gap, Chicago Portage, our Continental Divide between the South Branch and then the Des Plaines River. So they are canoeing up here. And then, of course, in the wet seasons, they could actually slog through the mud. If it was dry, they had to pull their canoes. But this was the best place to do this on the Great Lakes. And I will show that in a little bit. So by 1680, 7 years later, here's another French map. And look at, they're already saying this is the place to go. Portage of Chicago. This is where the traders are going to go now to get from the Lake Michigan area to the Mississippi River. This was the best. They're going to show two other spaces here, but we'll see why that was the best. So the other portages that Native Americans had used and the French knew about before this was the one that, of course, they took their initial trip on coming through Portage, Wisconsin. And there's one that connects the St. Joseph River into South Bend, Indiana to the Kankakee. So there's three possible decent portages, and I've drawn the Continental Divide here as the dotted line, where the waters go this way or this way. But which one is the best? Well, I will argue that here's the Chicago Portage if you look in cross-section. The Wisconsin Portage, you start from Lake Michigan, and you've got to go up and you've got to go up over a lot of waterways, over the Fox River and some of the rivers there. So it's running the river is a little harder. The actual portage isn't much different. But remember, if the waters hadn't cut through our glacial material, you'd have to go up over this as well. But we had that cut for us by the Chicago, that flood. And so this is actually much easier than doing this. You know, you don't want to have to drag your canoes up over this and fight the rapids over here. This was easier. This is a little topographic map of showing there's the Des Plaines River. We're going to see all these little changes later, but this is where then they carry their canoes through. You can see it's developed now, but I'm showing you this because there is a monument to Joliet and Marquette. This is Harlem Avenue. This is the I-55 Stevenson right here in the Portage Woods. And this is me flying out of Midway one year. You can see there's the Des Plaines River. And if you look closely, you will see right here, this is where they crossed, right through here somewhere. As you can see, it's hard to tell. But there is this monument. This is one of the best photos I ever took anywhere. I just captured to catch a good winter day. But there's this National Historic Landmark of, there's Marquette as a priest, and there's Joliet. And this is where they did the crossing. So this is our one national landmark in the Chicago area, Chicago Portage site. And to credit with Joliet, he saw that it was not just for canoes. Because of the flatness, here's his comment, you know, half a league, so of 2 or 3 miles, with a canoe, you could actually go from the Illinois River into Lake Michigan. And if you could make a canal, and he, of course, being French, they had already done this in France. The Native Americans had used that for thousands of years, but they did not have the technology to make canals. Joliet knew France did, so he thought this easy area, you could just connect these areas and dig it a little deeper, and then you wouldn't have to use canoes, you could use barges. And again, France had done this to connect the Atlantic to the Mediterranean through the Canal du Midi and Garonne. And these are what they look like today. They're just tourist things. But clearly that's much bigger than a canoe. And they were pulled by mules originally. And so that put the idea in, this is where you could build a big city. It was flat, and you could make through that portage a much more efficient route for moving materials and people. 150 years went by, nothing happened because, of course, there was a lot of wars, French and Indian War, American Independence War, War of 1812. But eventually, the United States gets this land. And eventually, there's a state called Illinois. And get a lot of machinations, but eventually also the land is given to Illinois to finally realize Joliet's vision of a canal. And that's going to be entitled the Illinois and Michigan Canal, again, connecting the Illinois River with Lake Michigan. So this began Finally, after a lot of, raising funds, Abraham Lincoln was involved with this as a state representative and then a U.S. representative, but it was finally started in the 1830s. And this was the big canal building time in America. The real famous one we all know, and there's a song, the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal connected Lake Michigan before Niagara Falls, because we couldn't go up those falls, connected the Great Lakes via Lake Erie through the Hudson. And so now with the I&M Canal, you could have a waterway from New Orleans all the way through the interior to New York. So that opens up all of this area to be loaded onto barges, because at this time there's no trains, there are no roads except a stagecoach. So boats are still the best way to go. So this canal started in the 1830s. It was hand dug primarily by Irish immigrants. They had come over in large numbers to work because of the potato famine. It was very hard, backbreaking work. Malaria was still endemic in this part of the world at that time. It was hard. But ultimately, the canal was designed about something on this size. And you can see those are much bigger boats than a canoe. They were pulled by mules in the initial, concept. You can still see the mule paths today. So it shortened the time to get from Chicago to Peoria, for example, from 3 days to 1 overnight. And you can see old pictures of a lot of towns grew up along the canal. There were locks to sort of control the water level. Again, some of this is from a book where somebody did a very nice imaging of the canals. Left over from that day, this is one of the oldest churches in the area. It's a Catholic church. It's all Irish. If you look at the gravestones here, it's people dating back from the 1830s. It sits on the top of the Valpo Moraine, right where the canal cuts through that Y. St. James of the Sag, it's known as. All right, so the canal was finished in 1848. So it was 90 miles. It was designed to keep 6 feet of water, 60 feet across. They needed some locks, towpath. It did not reverse the flow of the river in any major way. This becomes a big problem, but it caused the Chicago to grow. Before the canal was completed, this is about how many people lived in Chicago. 2 years after the canal's done, this is the fastest growing city in world history. And a couple of decades later, at the time of the Chicago fire, there's 300,000 people here, and then 1 million 2 more years later. No city in the world has ever grown this fast. It's because of the canal. Just about the time the canal cut through there, the railroads started too. So they worked out together, coming through the same geologic feature that nature gave us. But there's problems with growing that fast. At this time you didn't have sewage treatment. And think about if you live in Chicago, where is your sewage going? It's going into the Chicago River, which goes into Lake Michigan. And where are we getting our drinking water? From Lake Michigan. It doesn't sound like a good idea to be dumping your sewage into the same place you're getting your drinking water. And of course, it wasn't. As you had so many people, there's a saying for us environmental scientists: dilution is not the solution to your pollution problems. So, 5,000 people living in the city, yeah, Lake Michigan could dilute it, but not 1 million people. So Chicago was ravaged by many diseases of typhoid, cholera, many waterborne diseases. And also the canal, boats wanted to get bigger and the canal is small. So the decision was made with the new technology of the day to make a bigger, deeper canal, something that you couldn't just have Irishmen hand dig. And by the late 1800s, we had other technology like dynamite and steam shovels, and we can dig a deeper canal so the water will actually flow out from Lake Michigan through that hard bedrock the other way. And this is when the Chicago River got reversed in year 1900, January 3rd, I believe. So this was the famous Sanitary and Ship Canal. It's far larger than the Chicago, the I&M Canal. You can see it's much deeper, it's larger. Again, they moved more rock here than they did to make the Panama Canal. But the important thing for us is this: it reversed the flow of the Chicago River. So now the water is flowing out from Lake Michigan to St. Louis and Memphis and New Orleans, and they could have our sewage. And they did not like this. But we were bigger, and there's another whole story of there weren't laws against it, and we just did it. And there was still no sewage treatment for a while. So St. Louis was getting our sewage. They still work today. And then a second one was made in the 1930s on the lower part of that Y. That's called there's the sanitary chip canal, then the Sag Canal. So these are still active waterways, as you can see, that connect the Great Lakes to the Mississippi. This is an aerial view of where they join. This is the Y that I showed you earlier on. So this is the Sag Canal. This is the sanitary ship canal. This is the original Des Plaines River cutting through the Y. And that's the little old I&M Canal. It only exists in a few spots. Okay, but it's historic, and there's some bike paths along there. But this is where they join. It's in Lamont. And there's the actual view of that from a topographic map. So here is where the two canals join, and this way, and Des Plaines is still there. Sorry. Oops. So the end result of all of these human things is this. Before these diversions, the Chicago River and the Calumet River went into Lake Michigan, and the Des Plaines River went to the southwest with a little gap here. Drag your canoes. By reversing the flow of the river, the waters go this way, and then the Sag Canal goes this way. And so you've reversed, the water. Now, eventually Canada doesn't like this because these are international waters and you're not going to drain the Great Lakes. So there are treaties in effect, and there are two major locks. There's a lock at the head of Chicago River by Navy Pier, and there's one near me on the south side, and that regulates how much water can be allowed through the Chicago diversion. It's about 5 billion gallons a day. Okay, so that's an international treaty allows that. So these two major waterways cut through the Continental Divide because it was easy. It's 20 feet. I mean, it wasn't easy. You needed dynamite and shovels, but it was not crossing the Rocky Mountains. So that's why you can have clean water coming from the lake, send your sewage here. Of course, it is treated now. So our sewage is treated, water's clean, and we treat our water. But in the drinking water intakes, most of us who know Chicago, you can see them 2 or 3 miles offshore. There's two major ones, north and south side. The end result of all that. So this is a chart showing death rates in the late 1800s. I love looking at this. There's heart disease, there's tuberculosis, there's murder. Nothing really changes except this big, thick, dark line of typhoid and other waterborne diseases. They spiked in the late 1800s. As soon as the big canal was finished, they're basically gone. That's the end result of reversing the flow. So that's the good. The bad. Well, you reverse waterways that were once not connected, and then animals and or plants can move up into them. This is those of us in the environmental community know as invasive species, right? So invasive species can now move back and forth over areas that originally they were not designed to move. And one of them is the zebra mussel, which is, of course, came from overseas up through these canals through boats. Now it's going into the Mississippi River. Coming up from the Mississippi River, many of us in Chicago know the big worry is, of course, what? Oops, the carp. Worrying about the Asian carp that were introduced into the South to control algae. Well, of course, they got into the Mississippi River, and now they're working their way north toward Chicago. And we'll see if they get there. Phil Winnick, who is one of the members of the board here we've discussed this before. We're not actually that worried about, sorry. They probably don't have enough food because earlier invasives got into the lake and cleared out all their algae, but they are a big problem in the Illinois River. So that's the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'd like to have you follow your road. This is on my bicycle trip around Lake Superior. I saw the yellow brick road. It was not paved. I didn't take it. But anyway, follow your road. So if you didn't get this in the first half, here we go. Oh, for those of us in Chicago, I grew up, a lot of us know the 4 stars of the Chicago flag, right? The founding of Chicago, and then Fort Dearborn, the Great Chicago Fire, and then the 2 World's Fairs, 1893 and 1933. But I always thought that the blue was just, decoration. It's actually not. The North blue is representing the North Branch and Lake Michigan, and the South Branch and the Great Canal is represented here. So this city flag, which started in this 1917, even before we had the canal. It was finished by 1921 as full design because we added, and the later fair, is very conceptual. It's a very beautiful flag. Okay, I hope if you didn't get it in the first time, here we go. Oh, low away we go, west and east the waters flow, across the port to Chicago. 400 million years ago, along the equator and below, the sea waves to the gentle beat of trilobites on a coral reef. Now a quarry in the limestone block of the Niagaran bedrock. Low, low away we go, west and east the waters flow, across the Portage to Chicago. Come and hear of the ice and the snow. From the north, the glaciers go. They plow the hills with a grinding noise, make the land of Illinois. 15,000 years ago, the ice stalled here below, and then it melted back from whence it came, left behind the Valpo moraine. Ice sheets melt in the lake's big bowl, and they spill through with a mighty blow, bigger than 1,000 rains, carve the outlet for the display. Low, low away we go, west and east the waters flow, across the Portage to Chicago. Rains on fall on either side of the continent's divide, roll to the river or the sea. What will be, will be. With Native Americans as the guide, they traveled across the Great Divide. Joliet and Marquette went west to find the Orient, but they turned around and then they go through the Portage of Chicago. Low, low away we go, west and east the waters flow, across the Portage to Chicago. Follow the waters flow from the north. The Voyageurs go, they cross the divide with canoes, paddle, push, and carry canoes. Ripple on the river's flow from the lakes to points below. They dig the trench with pick and maul. Barges float the I&M Canal. Low, low away we go, west and east the waters flow, across the Portage to Chicago. Well, flush away, the sewage goes into the lake. Oh no, so they dig deep to breach the divide and reverse the flow of the river's tide. Time proceeds and all now know that as we change the river so, some things are good, some things are not. Now upswim the flying carp. Low, low, 3 million, oh, they're home on the shore, we know, to the ice and the men in the canoes. So long ago, Chicago. Thank you.
You.
Any, did the song come across?
Yes.
Sure did.
All right. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about well, there's three beaches, I guess. The Glenwood, the Tolston, and the Calumet? Any information about those?
Well, yeah, those are in different phases of Lake Michigan, and at once the lake sort of was, it dropped in 20-foot sections as that ice was blocked and opened several times over 12,000 years. The Glenwood is the oldest, it's the highest, it's sort of US 30 near us, and then the ice lake dropped 20 feet. that formed the Calumet Dunes for 5,000 years. Then it dropped another 20 feet for the Tolleson Dunes, and then approximately 20 more feet for the current dunes that we all know at the lakefront. But this had to do with sort of changes in the outlet up there in the north for a while. So that was much, it's part of the story. It's not part of the Chicago outlet itself, but
Thank you.
hopefully I answered that a little bit.
Yep.
Anyone else? Nothing.
Sorry, me again. Would you be willing to share the song? I think it's wonderful and it really covers everything, and it's fun.
If it makes, maybe it makes top 40 radio. Yeah, they'd go
somewhere.
Somewhere, this silly song about Portage. Sure. I mean, give me the venue and I'll come out.
Hey, Dave.
I'm not shy. Well, yes, I am, but.
Dave, a question about Chicago, the city itself. Did the city rely on nature for the flat plain that it's developed on, or was there any dredging and formation of that flat plain?
No, if you go back to in your mind to that earlier slide I had with the sort of the physiographic map, the reason Chicago is so flat is before it broke through the bathtub there, for a few thousand years, the water sort of flattened everything out. You know, the shores are moving around. So
Right.
no, it's pretty flat except for, and it's not mountains, but it's about 200 feet by the time you get out to the western burbs where I lived for a long while. In the city, it's about 80. There's a 100-foot difference for those of us who know about the Beverly Island, which is a leftover moraine that did not get washed away. But no, we didn't have to not make the whole plain flat. That's another reason Joliet saw this as an ideal place to make a city. You had such a big, broad. I actually probably should back up. You know, the reason I initially did this is I'm from Hammond and Gary, the bottom tip of the lake. You'd wonder, why isn't the city there? You know, you'd think if you have to cross this big boundary east to west, why isn't the big area there? And why is it sort of up to the side? Because we didn't have the outlet through the Valpo moraine. It was up to the side. That's where the Portage was. Now, certainly Hammond and Gary are part of the Chicago megapolis, and we have, but the reason that Chicago developed first is that's where the Portage was. There's no crossing the Valpo moraine from Hammond and Gary. You got to go up over the moraine. There's no creek that cuts through it.
Dave, it looks like Lou put a question in the chat. How much did glaciers versus plate tectonics contribute to the creation of the Great Lakes?
99.9%. I mean, plate tectonics, except moving us to this far north where the glaciers could come, that's too slow, and that really didn't affect this last little bit of geology, really. I mean, it sets up the conditions that the reason we have that tropical ocean with trilobites and things 400 million years ago is because we were at the equator. And so, yes, 400 million years of plate tectonics moved us to the north. But the current geography and things that we have it's not really a plate tectonic issue. It's in geology, it's called geomorphology. It's sort of the later things covering it. It's not a structural plate issue. People can argue that the Great Lakes are here because of some weak spots in the North American continent too, perhaps, but that's minor. Gets a little esoteric, maybe. Good question, however. All of them are good.
Did you write the song, Dave?
I wrote the song, Cynthia, yes. I wrote the song, and it came to me. I'm walking to the train one day. I had prepared this talk to give to an organization, and I just was thinking and of course, people know I teach at Columbia College, and I thought, man, I got to do something with some music. And I literally, walking to the train, I got the chorus in my head of "Low, Low, Away We Go." I had written half of it by the time I got home 40 minutes later. And then I got my guitar to try to put the kind of chords I wanted, and I've developed it over the years. So those who see my class at Columbia know there's verses about the Chicago Fire and the Chicago World's Fairs and a lot of other things because we cover that, but I didn't want to bore you with all that. But yes, I wrote the song, and I grabbed the images from the internet, okay, because I'm not a visual artist, but lyrics and music are mine.
I figured. Sorry I
Thank-
was late shoveling the driveway outside.
Okay, that's fine. That's great. You look great. Okay, one eye. That's good.
Yeah,
I have
good black
another,
eye, huh?
Yes. You're gonna get
I have
whacked
another
by your
question.
granddaughter. Okay. Yes.
I probably missed it in your presentation, but when you were comparing the Wisconsin Portage opportunity versus the Chicago Portage opportunity, you also mentioned the third one near South Bend. Did you evaluate that? How did that compare with the other two?
For time wise, I do it on a bigger talk. I wanted to really show the stark difference in the elevation gain you needed in Wisconsin. The other one was much more gradual, but then you didn't have the big broad area close to the lake like you did with the Chicago Portage either. So, I mean, Joliet really had this vision. This is where to go. So that one was semi-easy, but then the Kankakee River, by the time you get there, is not as big. You know, the Des Plaines was a creek, but it was close to the Illinois River. The Kankakee was quite far from the where it becomes the Illinois when it joins the Des Plaines. That's why I did not really give equal weight in this talk to showing why it was not the best candidate to make a giant city and the vision of we can make a canal here and that's what we're going to need. We talk about Native Americans and they'd use all of these for a long time, but it does take they didn't have visions of canoe of how you can build a canal. So they probably didn't realize if you can make this deeper you get bigger boats. They did not see that. It took somebody who knew this, and Joliet was a Frenchman, and they had done this in France. They had the technology to dig and have bigger boats, and mules pulling them. And of course, Native Americans did not have beasts of burden to do that. Dogs, but
Dave, this is Marge.
yeah. Yes, Marge?
Yeah, a question. Once in a while, you'll hear someone talk about that they're going to, the river shouldn't be reversed. We're going against nature. Is the reason for not doing that an engineering or the economics of what is built along the canals because of that?
Probably economics. I mean, engineeringly, they could block that up. It's only 200 feet across and 20. You could block it. I'm pretty sure. But yes, there's way too much economic commerce. They are talking more about doing that now. There's a barrier, electronic barrier, to try to prevent the carp from swimming up. But to make a full barrier would be billions of dollars of lost economic activity. And the argument that we're sending our sewage to St. Louis anymore, that's not a problem because we do treat the water. But when it first was opened, St. Louis had went to the story here, if you have a second, the story is they went to the Supreme Court to try to prevent this. And the people of Chicago who were doing this were worried that the Supreme Court might say, stop this. So literally at the middle of the night, they went and hand dug the last couple feet to have a little trickle. Their argument was if the water was flowing, the Supreme Court wouldn't reverse it because now it was a flowing waterway. And that worked. It's crazy. It's a really crazy story of these guys in top hats in the middle of the night with shovels in January trying to open up a little gap in the last the bits that need to be dug. But that's what happened. Today, something like that could never be done. There would be way too many environmental laws to connect waterways like that. But that's what allowed us to then continue growing and not dying of typhoid, et cetera. But that's the reason then we're much bigger than St. Louis and everything else, because we could connect to the Great Lakes. St. Louis had great, obviously, with the Missouri and Mississippi and Ohio, but we had the Great Lakes.
How well documented is the South Bend area or the Kankakee Portage? Is there monuments and markers there?
I have a plan to go and try to check that out. I do not know. I've never actually wanted to walk through it. Of course, I know the Chicago Portage pretty intimately, and I've been through the Portage area of Wisconsin, but I do not know a lot about the South Bend. I should check into that to see if they have some documentation. If anybody knows, please let me know. Steve, you were at Notre Dame for a long time. How about it? So
I've no knowledge there, but I did want to commission you to do a similar study out there, and I've got a good song that you might fit to it.
Oh, okay. We'll talk. Steve is a graduate school colleague of mine who's a water scientist as well, PhD water scientist.
Yeah, and Notre Dame. Well, we both share the IU Bloomington degree, but I also went to Notre Dame, and I'm quite excited about them this Thursday.
You're a domer, yes.
Yes.
Know. Okay. Anybody else? Again, I'm very thankful for the opportunity to present to Wolf Lake. Again, I think it's a great organization. I was happy to serve on the board for the couple of years. And thanks to Mike for arranging this. And I'm really thankful that you enjoyed it, learned something. Maybe you have an earworm song in your head for the evening here. I could do it one more time.
Okay. Well, I just want to, I'm grateful to Dave for his presentation this evening. And Valerie and I thank you all for attending the gathering. And next month, it will be Dr. Larry McClellan on the Underground Railroad, as all the research done on that. I think he's written three or four books on that as well. And so that will be in February. So thank you all for coming. I'll